New on Curiosity Stream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing to keep the Grinch away from the toy drive.
Who's going to deliver the toys to the kids?
What about me, the Grinch?
No.
Yep, even easier than that.
You steal the presents one time.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Capital One NA, member FDIC. Copyright Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Copyright Turner Entertainment Company.
Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, happy Friday evening to you guys. Told you I'd be back for part 2 to cover the cross-exam of Jake Wagner's Alaska wife, Elizabeth. And so here I am. Real quick song fact, kind of a TV song fact, but it features Stevie Nicks. She appeared on the American Horror Story season Coven, which is my favorite season of the entire series. She plays a fictionalized white witch version of herself, and a character on the show, Misty Day, was obsessed with Stevie Nicks, and her songs are featured throughout the season. And her first appearance, she comes through a door and says, "Hello, witches, love it." This time tomorrow night, I will be seeing Miss Stevie Nicks. And I tell you what, keep an eye on my social media because there's a really good chance I will go live at some point. All right, so let's get in on this cross exam. I have been reading a little bit about people's opinions about Elizabeth's testimony today, and I would say about 95% of it is super positive. People were blown away at how credible she seemed, how honest she answered the questions, and how she really didn't get rattled with any of the questions, although sometimes emotions did take over, understandably, given what she went through. And I thought as a whole, Parker was respectful towards her. I'm glad he did not get rough with her. She seems very fragile. I don't think it would have worked in his favor anyway. She did give it back to him in her own way. So let's get to it. He asked about her childhood and asked why she moved often as a kid. And it's because her dad was in the military. And he also brings up the fact that she did make some YouTube videos about her experience with the Wagners, and she admitted that she did. And he says, "You're a religious person and have been." And she said she really only got religious around the age of 22. So he asked her to describe her daily life in the Amish community, and she said it's just very tight-knit. She was homeschooled by her mom, and she went to Alaska, as we know, to finish getting her GED, since in the Amish community, kids only go to school until the 8th grade. And he asked about her religious background, and she says she's read up on all the major religions. She started listing them off. And so he says, "You met Jake in Alaska in 2017, and she agrees she did. She had already been in Alaska since November of 2016, and she went to that church with her friends because she lived with them, and it was really convenient for her just to go." And he talks about how quickly her and Jake were engaged, and she said it wasn't really odd to her because that is typical in the Amish community, that you start dating and most of the time quickly get engaged. Nobody told her she shouldn't marry Jake. And he asked if she suffered a brain injury at some point. And I thought, here we go. He's going to start bringing up stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with any of this. And so she explained that she had it wasn't a traumatic brain injury. She just had some issues with her brain in the frontal cortex in January of 2020. And he said, I'm sure it's traumatic. And she said, brain damage doesn't have trauma. And he asked if it affected her ability to remember things. And she said no. She said at the time, it mainly she was forgetting names of people, but that's since resolved. She wasn't hospitalized for this because this was in January 2020. This was right at the beginning of COVID. And because she wasn't critical, they thought it would just be safer for her to recover at home. So they talk about Jake proposing and her accepting, and they did not have a reception. She said her and Jake went to the hotel for one night. George and Billy and the rest of the family, as we know, left the next morning to go to Missouri, but she had that problem with her passport. So when in Alaska with everyone, George and Jake had jobs. And she said she was unsure about George, but Jake worked at an auto shop. And she thinks maybe George did as well. She said Jake seemed to be the primary breadwinner for the whole family. And she just wasn't around George very much in Alaska, maybe just a couple of times before she technically just moved in with him and the whole family. She only knew him from seeing him at church, and once after meeting him following her engagement to Jake. He asked why they left Alaska, and she said the Wagners wanted a farm in Missouri. So Parker says that Jake and George have been laid off from their jobs, and he talks about how expensive it is to live in Alaska, and she agrees it's very expensive there. Parker says Jake and George were pursuing a trucking job there in Missouri. So, we had that whole thing. I can't exactly remember, but there was a problem with them securing a loan to get a place in Missouri. That fell through, and they ended up at Angela's father's house. So when the Wagners left for Missouri the day after the wedding, Parker asked who put her up at the hotel in Alaska while her passport was getting sorted out, and she said George and Billy did. Speaking of those sleeping arrangements in the hotel when she first got there, and was super horrified to find out that they would all be in the same room, he asked if it would surprise her if George slept in the truck instead of the chair. And she said, yeah, that would surprise me considering I saw him asleep in the chair that night. He didn't go there. He just went on. George, as we know, left the following day to take Billy to Flying W Farms. And she said he was gone a day or two before returning. He took Billy to Ohio and made clear when he got back that he and Vine were going back to Ohio. Whoever wanted to join them could. But Parker pointed out Jake and Angela did not want to go. And he asked about the family meetings that she was present for and asked if she was actually in the kitchen during those meetings. And she said the meetings were in the kitchen and she was in the next room over, which was the living room, but there was no divider. She said it was essentially kind of one room. So she heard everything. She said George would argue with Angela and Jake both often with a very loud voice, and she just wasn't used to that. She said the way they argued, the tone and everything would shock most people. So George would often, when they got back to Ohio, George would often stay out late at night, come home late. When asked if Jake was a homebody, she said no, not necessarily. But Parker said in Ohio, Jake and George got a trucking job. And as we know, they drove tandem. This is where they got some of those wiretaps. Those are going to come in later, I think, where they acknowledged that they had put a tracking device on Beth's phone while she was with them. One time she did go with them on the road for the week. They went to Colorado, Texas, Florida, St. Louis. They hid her in the truck because it was against company policy. And he mentions at one point she sat up front with George while he was driving. And Parker made it sound like George wasn't friendly to her, but she said he talked to her. Parker says George wasn't on board with the marriage, was he? She said he was. She wasn't sure. And Parker said it wouldn't surprise you if George was against the marriage. And she said that was just something I never heard. So then they talked about Jake and religion. And Parker said Jake was religious, but Elizabeth said he wasn't very religious because he just didn't know much beyond the surface of that religion. It seems to me they were fundamental Baptists. And he professed Christianity, but seemed to know very little about it. And he didn't seem to want to learn about it. He didn't have a deep understanding of the religion. So they talked about Jake. He said, you would call him every night and read him scripture. And she said, no, actually, Jake would call me and ask that I read him scripture. She was not aware that BCI was recording the phone calls of the Wagners. And Parker says, so a family member or a friend offered you a free college education if you left Jake. And she says, I don't remember anybody offering me a free college education. They agreed she would move away and go to college and give things around Ohio time to settle down with the media. And the plan eventually was to get back together. She said they had several discussions about it. And the day she left, George and Jake were actually on the road driving. So Parker walks through her dad and her friend getting her out of Ohio. Later in July, BCI contacted her. She agreed to meet with them and cooperated, met them in Virginia where she was living, and gave a very lengthy interview. And Parker asked if she knew the interview was being recorded, and she said yes. He has this thing about interviews being recorded. And I don't know why, because it's well within their right to record anybody without their knowledge when they're talking about a murder case, from my understanding. So they explained to her a lot of the evidence BCI did that they had against the Wagners, and asked if she would make a call to Jake and let them record and monitor the call. So she agreed. In the interview, they also asked about George. Parker says, you told them one of the things about George was that he told sexist and crude jokes and that offended you. And he asked if Jake told any kind of those jokes. And she said no. I was confused by this because we hear that George frequented sex workers, and she called them by another name. I won't repeat that name, but it seems like almost sometimes on this cross exam, he was pointing out some of the bad things about George, which is the crude jokes. And Parker said George would tell her the jokes, but he said other things, and that Beth came to an opinion that he said, did you come to the opinion he was kind of a blowhard? And she said, I would have to look up the definition of blowhard, but that sounds about right. She said George and Jake would say super mean things when they were angry. She said Parker says George was much heavier when you knew him. He has George stand up, and George kind of rolls his eyes and he says, is he smaller than when you last saw him? And this is something that Parker and Nash both like to point out about George. They've done it at pretrial hearings. They've done it at the trial. And I guess they're really proud of him, but I'm not sure why that was relevant that George has lost weight. Prison food's not like going to Wendy's. So a lot of people lose weight. Angela has lost weight in jail as well, if you look. Billy, he's still eating pretty good in there. Parker says, you said he stayed out late at night and was with yucky people. You said he hung out with the W word and that offended you. And she said, I think a lot of people find that, Parker says, I think a lot of people find sex workers offensive. And Beth said, I just think it's unfortunate. And I think that might have been a good way to put it. A lot of times, as we know, these women are desperate, or they're making ends meet, or whatever reason. But it is unfortunate because a lot of times we do read stories of the consequences of their career of choice ends up becoming a case that we do cover. She was uncomfortable being around George due to his partaking in sex workers. Billy and Angela did not have jobs. George and Jake would come home, and she would try to spend time with Jake, and George would go out. She said George would also go to some family gatherings that they had on the Wagner side, I guess, like with the Newcombs and things like that. Parker brings up that photo of Jake, Beth, and the kids. He turned it. I was able to see the photo. It looks like the kids are in the trees, like on a branch. And then you have Jake with his arm up, kind of holding Sophia. You can see Vine in the other branch. And Parker points out, he says, "You seem to be pretty happy in that photo." And she said, "It's a picture. People tend to smile in photos." He asked if she was happy, and she says she doesn't know if she was happy in that particular photo. But I would fair to say if she was happy, she seemed to be looking up maybe at Sophia. So why would she not smile? I think she made very clear today that she cared for that child and was willing to take Sophia on as if she were hers. And I I think in the video she did that was posted way before this trial, where she was sort of answering basic questions about her time with the Wagners, you could tell that her love for Sophia was very genuine. And I hope wherever Sophia is and Kylie that they're happy. We know that Vine is with his mommy. So he brings up Angela accusing her of inappropriately touching Sophia, and she said she was just horrified about that. She wondered why she was living with people who were even accusing her of things like that. And Parker says, "This is when you plan to leave." And she said, "I started planning to leave, not because of the allegations, but because Jake planned to murder me, or said he would murder her." He talks about the journal she wrote in, and you thought she used Vine and Sophia against George and Jake. And she agreed, yes, that Angela would use those kids as a weapon. Parker says Jake was looking for a wife in Alaska, and she said, "I don't remember coming to that conclusion." They didn't go to church also when they got back to Ohio. She wasn't allowed to go. And Parker said maybe they all just wanted to lay low. And Parker says this case has been going on for 2 years and you knew there was media attention. And she said she never saw it when she was there. After she left Ohio, we know she lived out of state. And Parker mentions you didn't want us to know where you live. You filed for divorce. You have had no contact with George since you left Ohio. And she says no. He says you didn't want to talk to George's defense lawyers before today. Why is that? This is what she said. She says, "The Wagners terrify me. Do you like discussing things with people who terrify you?" And I think you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom when she said that, because I know this has been the source of a lot of conflict between the state and the defense. The defense wanted access to her. Canepa really tried to protect her, and good for Canepa, because she's scarred from this. I think she's resilient. I think she's strong. I think she'll be fine. I think today she was very, very brave. She does have some haters out there. I have read it. I don't know why. Sometimes people tend to hate on anybody who's associated with suspects involved in murders, even if it's deserved or not. And I have seen the interview she's done. I don't fault her for doing a GoFundMe to get divorced. She did not have a college education. She didn't have a solid job. And she needed money to get divorced. And who wouldn't want to be free of that last name and those people officially? So I'm not sure why some of the comments today I read were not very kind. And so Parker said Jake discussed his religious beliefs with you and seemed to think he was going to heaven. And she said, yeah, he seemed to think so. Parker said Jake and Angela lied to you about their involvement in this case. And she said, yes. She felt she was duped by Jake in Alaska to get married. I wonder why Jake wanted to get married. Why was he seeking another wife? The other thing that was never discussed today was the fact that she conceived and lost a baby with Jake at some point during the marriage. I really thought that would have been touched on, but it never was. Maybe it's not relevant, but I thought it would have maybe been good to bring up, especially with an all-female jury, but they didn't. So he says, when BCI interviewed you in Virginia in July of 2018, they asked you about George and asked when George would talk about what he would do, what he would say he would do if he could get his hands on investigators. And Elizabeth said George would say, if I had my way, we wouldn't be hiding out like this. We would be storming Mike DeWine's office. They asked if she thought they were serious to BCI BCI asked her if she really thought they would do this, and she said essentially she thought they were all just full of it. He says, when you left Ohio, you were escaping Angela more than anyone, and she flat out said she was escaping Jake, George, Billy, and Angela, not just Angela, the whole family. So on redirect, Angela said, since your interview with BCI in Virginia in 2018, have you met with them additionally? And she had. She said they essentially went over the same information each time that she had given them in the initial interview. She was asked why they wanted to move to Missouri. And you said to buy a farm, and was that all of them together? And she said it was all of them together planning to buy the farm, including Billy at that point. She told BCI Chris Newcomb and Billy were scrapping together when they got back, and Billy thought that Chris was cheating him. They always think somebody's plotting against them or got some, scheme against them, when really it's projection, because they have schemes against everybody they come in contact with that doesn't have the last name Wagner or share some kind of DNA with them. She said, even though George left a lot at night, he always returned, which is just reiterating that it was a unit. They were never apart. They brought Agent Scheider up after she got off the stand, and she left. He said she left the Wagner home July 6, 2018. They were intercepting calls, so they knew the plan. So him and a bunch of other agents were waiting in the Walmart parking lot for her to see what was taking place that day. I really wonder, too, if they had concerns for her safety and were just there looking out for her. They had a team there, multiple cars. They had surveillance going. So the Wagners arrived in the white Suburban. There that day was Angela, Rita, Beth, and the kids. They had a small meeting at the rear of the car, and they all walked inside. An agent who had no connection to this case and was not familiar to any of them went in and followed them, but they lost track of Elizabeth. We know she ducked into a changing room to change her clothes. They were scrambling, trying to find her. So it just so happened Agent Scheider pulled around the back to like the garden and tire section and saw the car with the out-of-state plates. So he saw a female putting a hat on or messing with her hair. He thought that kind of looked out of place. So he followed the car for a long time. He said it seemed they were going in circles, maybe trying to lose somebody. She also acknowledged that they drove around for a while just to be sure they weren't being followed. They followed the car and contacted a sheriff's office in the next town to conduct a traffic stop to identify the people inside, but the vehicle pulled into a rest area. So they had a detective approach the car, and they were able to identify her by sight, just walking by, and then they left her alone. So I think really they were probably making sure nothing strange was going to happen with her at that Walmart or anything wasn't going to go down. But also it proved to them that she did indeed leave the house. So that was it. It wasn't a whole lot. Parker really didn't go hard on her. There's really no point. There was nothing there to get out of her. It was clear her knowledge of things was zero. She had just been told by people in authority in her mind, such as the pastor and the people she lived with in law enforcement, to trust the Wagners and to be with Jake. So I think her testimony today was very, very powerful. It matches Hannah Mae and Tabitha's versions of how the Wagners operate. It just is a continuation and validation that this was a unit, and they, even though George may have went out, in the wee hours of the morning, all the major stuff was discussed amongst them. We know now there was an official designated decision maker at various times in that family, and during this time it was Angela. I think Angela and Jake probably were a little bit more in tune with the fact that the walls were closing in. George was paranoid, but Angela really, I think when she found out they were searching and digging up around that barn, that's when it got very real to her, because she kept asking, what barn, what barn, what barn? And so anyways, I thought she was an amazing witness. I thought she was super brave to not only get on that stand, but to opt in. and let us see her face and hear her voice and hear her story. I think it definitely was more powerful than getting a summary in print form. And we know she wanted to get her story out there due to the fact that she did several videos way before this trial started. She did not say anything that was out of line. She made clear she could not discuss anything about the murders. She knew nothing. And so Parker really didn't hit her hard on that. I thought he would. I also thought he would bring up the fact that she said they burned the diaries, but it's very possible she had other diaries that they didn't find. And she seems to be doing well for herself. She is working in service, and I don't believe she's finished college. She's still working on that. But man, I mean, to go out in the world really with, as we say in the South, a little wet behind the ears, meaning not very experienced. She was thrown into probably one of the most terrifying and chaotic situations she could have been thrown in. And she handled her time on the stand today with grace and with dignity and very sure of herself. And I never once saw any shame in her, nor should she have any, but I did see fear, and I see the fear still there. And so kudos to her. I thought that's going to be a hard witness to top. I guess the next biggest thing is going to be Jake and Angela. I'm sure they'll opt out. But I was told today that the defense does not expect to present their case for about another 2 weeks. So seems like I think Jake will be on the stand for several days, maybe between direct and cross, given the fact that he is going to walk this jury through from beginning planning stages, before planning, when it was decided to be planned, during the planning, how it happened minute by minute, and then the years after before they were arrested. Angela, I think, will back up the fact that uh, George knew of the plan. She will confirm he went that night. And that will be what I think gets George convicted. I don't think that the jury will have a lot of reasons to doubt Jake. He pled guilty. He didn't take it to court. Yeah, he had death taken off. Ohio stopped executions, from what I understand. They don't have the drugs or some issue about the drugs. And these days, the death penalty is, unless you live in Texas where they don't play, we're seeing that the death penalty is used less and less and less. So it essentially becomes life anyway. And you don't have all the appeals. You don't have all the little things that could get a case overturned or cause trouble. So life in prison, fine with me, because they're never going to breathe free air ever again. And curious about Billy. I don't know that Billy's trial is going to be as interesting as this, because we're hearing so many things for the first time. I think this is going to be a lot of regurgitation of the same facts for Billy. And who knows, if George gets convicted, maybe Billy sees his chances are pretty much zero, given the fact that they have the least amount of evidence against George. And even though juries make me nervous, there can always be one. And I've seen it a million times. If you follow Casey Anthony, that seemed like a sure thing and she got off. So I'm always nervous with juries, but 8 people, he knew, he didn't stop it. He's going down. But anyways, what a great day for testimony. And I really, really hope that Elizabeth has a peaceful life from here on, now that she has done her duty to bring justice to the Roden family. And yeah, so that was the cross. Thanks for all you that made some sweet comments about Grammy's MRI. We got it done. We got in and out. We had some good laughs in the car. And we had dinner together. It was very nice. We took some food home so she could be comfortable. So tomorrow, keep an eye on that social media. I'm going live when she starts singing some good hits, maybe once or twice. But for the most part, I'm going to enjoy Stevie with my girls. See you guys Monday for an all-new recap of this. And I'm going to try to throw in a Valo Daybell Mega Series episode next week and keep going with that. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to all the new viewers. You see here, we're getting close to 10,000. on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and hit the like button, because that pushes these videos out to people who might be interested in this case. And I'll love you forever. All right. Have a good weekend, y'all.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.